Please take your seat, then we will start the panel discussion. And with François Laruelle's talk, we got back to the actual place. We are the exhibition hall with his talk about the relation between philosophy and art. And so I would like to start the panel conversation, the panel discussion, with a question if you have any comments or question on François Laruelle's talk. And now we have some time for translation for you.
Is this on? Oh, it is on. I would like to ask Monsieur Laruelle about how his engagement with photography differs from that of Roland Barthes.
La dame veut savoir comment vous différenciez ich brauche das nicht, votre image de la photographie contrairement à Roland Barthes. Votre engagement, yeah, the camera lucida of Roland Barthes, the text.
Oui, je me souviens plus très bien. C'est vieux tout ça, vous savez. Je me souviens plus très bien.
He says he doesn't remember very well. It is old, all this.
Barthes est certainement très fin, très nuancé.
Barthes is certainly very subtle and very fine, very smart.
Mais je fais le pari, c'est très dangereux.
I give a bet.
Que c'est pas très rigoureux.
That it is not very rigorous. Yeah, it's the right English word? Yeah. Okay, this is, okay?
Yeah, merci.
You would also like to comment, or do you have a question? Or, but, no, only if you want to.
Non, je voulais poursuivre une dernière question, puis je vous laisse un peu. Sur la photo infinie comme corps sans organes, vous avez dit, ça m'intéressait énormément. Une photo infinie qui n'est pas une photo empirique précise, mais c'est la possibilité de. Est-ce que vous pourriez élaborer, parce que cela nous dire quelque chose en plus? Mais il faut d'abord qu'elle traduise. Do I translate it myself? My question was on, there was one passage in Professor Laruelle's talk about the infinite photo, the possibility of infinite photography. And he compared it to the body without organs in Deleuze, which is the possibility of alternative ontologies. So I wanted to ask him to elaborate on that, and poor translator has to deal with it.
Moi, je crois que cette idée de... Je ne sais pas si elle est vraiment formulée comme cela dans le livre sur le cinéma, probablement. Mais je crois que ça a plutôt une origine, je dirais, leibnizienne. Bon, la photo infinie, elle est infinie parce qu'elle contient d'autres photos en elle-même. Il y a eu des films faits là-dessus, en particulier un film d'Antonioni. Il y a une photo dans la photo, etc. Il y a des photos dans chaque photo. Donc, à la limite, il y a une infinité de photos.
You want to translate, or yes. I think perhaps.
It refers to it. It is the case of Deleuze. The point about the body without organs. That point comes not only in the cinema books, but in other texts as well. And it is it comes from Leibniz. It's a Leibnizian idea of multiple possible worlds and the possibility of infinite photography, infinite modes and variations of alternative ontologies. And I think generationally, Laruelle's work here is very important and echoes with that of the French philosophers. He really needs to be, Laruelle's work needs to be really revalorized and put up there together with the other giants of his generation. He's equally great, and we're a bit late in recognizing the concept of non-philosophy as alternative ontology. Sorry, this is not a question, it's a comment.
No, then you want to comment on this? It is. You just have to hold it.
Anyway, I have two mics now. That's great. It's not great. Okay. I had quite a sort of a relatively simple question, which was just expanding on François' discussion of the relation between philosophy and art. I was wondering, insofar as he is presenting in his idea of non-photography a certain suspension of the philosophical dimension internal to photography. Sorry. I was wondering whether there's a more general suspension of the philosophical dimension of art than merely in relation to photography. So to put it in perhaps a way which I think might make sense is there something in art comparable to the principle of sufficient philosophy?
Oui, il y a toujours eu beaucoup d'attraction mutuelle entre l'art et la philosophie. D'ailleurs, je ne suspends pas toute philosophie. Je suspends, je n'ai pas eu le temps de le dire, ce que j'appelle le principe de philosophie suffisante.
Yes, he is not suspending art completely, but he's questioning about the art as a total, or what did you say?
Principe de philosophie suffisante. Non,
A principle of philosophy which is sufficient.
Est supposé atteindre le réel par excellence.
The philosophy is asked to attain reality, at least.
Par contre, je me sers de la philosophie, mais sans priver, en quelque sorte, du principe de philosophie suffisante.
But I am serving of philosophy. I'm taking philosophy without philosophy sufficient. This is why.
C'est pourquoi la philosophie est un matériau.
This is why philosophy is a material.
Un matériau pour toute pensée.
For all kind of thoughts.
On ne peut pas l'éliminer complètement.
You can't eliminate it completely.
C'est du positivisme.
It's positivism.
Non, on peut éliminer certaines fonctions de domination.
Yeah, you can eliminate some functions of elimination.
Ou de normativité.
And normativity.
De la philosophie.
Of philosophy.
Mais il y a une matérialité dans la philosophie dont il faut tenir compte.
There's a material point in philosophy which you have always to consider.
C'est pourquoi je conjugue, selon un terme d'ailleurs pris de la mécanique quantique, surtout, bien que le mot conjugué soit banal.
Conjugué, what is English? Yeah, you're conjugating.
Je conjugue toujours deux disciplines ou deux théories face à face.
So he is conjugating always two theories, one in front of the other.
What you're saying is the philosophy is conceptual art, and the material of that conceptual art is thought, which is very, very, very close to Deleuze, actually. I don't want to go there. En fait, vous dites que la philo, c'est un petit peu de l'art conceptuel, et la matière de cet art de la philo, c'est la pensée elle-même. C'est une façon de formater la pensée. Enfin, je traduis mal, mais ça pourrait aller.
Because we left out your comment on Pete's talk before, I would now come back to the differences between the first panel and the second panel, so I would invite you to comment
So now you know why I keep extensive notes, because by the end of the day, when you're brain dead, you get a question like that. Ha! But I have my diary. So, wonderful. So let's rewind the tape. How are we doing for Professor Laruelle? Are you going to translate as we go, or... well, because I'm now opening a discussion with Peter on this. Okay, well, see how we go. So that was a really exciting paper. Thank you very much. And I wanted to salute it as a very interesting, robust cartography. You traced your own genealogy of a tradition, rational humanism, to cut a long story short, and you did that passionately and convincingly. Whether I then believe in the genealogy or yet is a different story. But the first point I wanted to make here, we have philosophy made of a dialogical exchange of cartographies. And so you've made your reading, all of us have made other readings. Comparing readings is one way of doing philosophy. That requires a quality that you have, and I salute, and the object ontologies do not have, and that is dialogical openness. So I wanted to both salute that and make the point. Now, I have questions internal to your cartography and questions external to it, but I will start from the external one. I was very intrigued that you started at the start. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was man. So where do you position yourself to construct a narrative that begins at the beginning? Greek myths, the Bible. In my language, this would be, what is your politics of location? Or what is the radical immanence of your positioning? Or what is your place of enunciation, which used to be the Lacanian, Derridian evocative? That was my first one, thank you.
A couple of lines that ended up getting cut out of the introduction because, I didn't have as much time, was actually just sort of positioning this insofar as obviously what I was telling was the history of the Western conception of the human. Sorry. Obviously, the whole genealogy I presented, at least the genealogy of humanism, was distinctively Western. There's no place in it for Chinese thought, Indian thought, African thought, whatever other thought you. But the specific reason for that was that I was concerned with addressing critical posthumanism, and critical posthumanism, even though it is rejecting crucial features of the Western conception, is precisely a response to that Western conception. And so in order to assess whether it is an effective response or not, it was important to go through and see whether or not the way in which humanism was framed by the critical approach was correct or not. I think there are problems with the standard critical post-humanist narrative. So
I understand the polemical force of this, but I still am not convinced that you have a location at all. I hear you as, certainly better than Harman and the others, as being utterly disembedded. You are speaking from nowhere. It's the God trick. In the beginning was the Word, Greek mythology, Judeo-Christian myth, whatever. And you lose me immediately on that because I have heard this all my life. People doing the God trick on me, telling me narratives. You are at the heart of the meta-discursive disembeddedness, which is everything I've fought against all my life.
But this is the thing. Remember that I've grown up post-structuralism, and so the narrative I have heard my entire philosophical life has been composed of a variety of anti-humanist cliches that I think are not entirely wrong, but certainly partial truths. And so the only way to address their partiality is to address what they get wrong about their bête noirs within the Western tradition. And if that means going back to the beginning, which they themselves tend to do, right? Remember that the anti-humanist tradition almost consistently engages the theological core of the humanist tradition to disagree with it, you have to disagree with its interpretation of that theological core.
Point taken. Is also a big generational difference. What was blasphemy becomes banality, and Foucault and Derrida are part of the canon, and you have to take them in and take them for granted. I'm not convinced, but let's go on this. I could also do and say the same thing slightly differently and then reach out to what I think is your conceptual punchline, which is a strong punchline. But let me come into another angle. You've actually drawn a narrative of the origins. A narrative of the origins which has a double punch. You're saying it's a deconstruction of the dominant humanist narrative. We could discuss this, but okay, let's let it go. But it is also the genesis of your counter-tradition. You agree with this, but it is a narrative of the origins. Freud would go to town on this, on the narrative of the origins, from father to son. Is really male. There is not a woman playing a role anywhere. And that's my second major objection, not to you, but to the object ontologists. The wipe out of feminism. It's a wipe out. It's a delete button. It's like gone. And not just my generation, but Mary Wollstonecraft. I mean, the whole thing. Post-colonialism, race theory, delete, gone. What's going on here? Would it not be simpler to say this is a narrative of the origins, which generationally you need to do because you have inherited a massive Oedipalizing canon coming after Derrida and Deleuze must be hell if you're a white male. I mean, what do you do? I mean, those of us who always were the undutiful daughters got out in time, but wouldn't it be better to talk about the anxiety of influence instead of producing more narrative of the origins which repeat the hegemonic gesture?
Well, okay, there's two narratives within my talk. One, as I say, is a narrative of response. It's an attempt to retell the narrative that critical posthumanism is based upon in order to disagree with it. So that's the first half of the paper. The second is only a narrative of origins insofar as it's precisely what you asked for in your talk, namely an engagement with the evolution of the human animal. Like, one of your big criticisms of the alternative humanist traditions was their inability to engage with the evolutionary paradigm on its own terms. And in presenting an account of the emergence of rationality in informational terms, that's precisely what I was aiming to do.
I understand that and I fully appreciate it. I thought you did an amazing job, extremely rigorous and very erudite. But in tracing the informatics of animality, are you providing a vital supplement to a tradition that we've all abandoned, or are you actually seeding, so planting the seeds of a counter-tradition, or are you doing both? Are you rescuing the work of the fathers, or are you saying, actually, we're out of here doing something different? I couldn't figure what the affect there.
It's splitting the difference. The point is, so take one particular thing. So in the critical post-humanist narrative, there's a tendency to focus upon Descartes and the problems of Descartes' conception of mind, and then to castigate the sort of residue of Kant's political philosophy as if it just falls naturally out of Descartes. So I can agree with a lot of the criticisms of Descartes, but I think there is something crucial in Kant's work, which is precisely a crucial rejection of Descartes, and that despite all of the other problems of Kant, and there are many, many other problems, his anthropology and everything else put to one side, that is worth, that crucial transcendental moment is worth saving and bringing out and trying to relate it to the sort of informatics I was putting forward. So another way of putting this would be, so I recently reread The Order of Things, precisely in order to deal with the Foucauldian narrative of the death of man. And one of the interesting things that I realized is that one of the options Foucault presents, Foucault talks about, well, where do we go from here? And one of the options he presents is, well, we could actually become more transcendental. We could aim to pull away the transcendental side of the transcendental empirical doublet and pursue that, and that's what I'm doing.
Exactly. The next, I promise, my last question, then we're going to the conceptual core. Yeah. Indeed, you're going the transcendental route. Indeed, you're going the rational humanism route. Now, how does your naturalization of the human predisposition for computational system differ from evolutionary biology? Are you now naturalizing rationalism? I mean, what else is new would be the next question, but are you? I think that...
The crucial issue is, and I'll say the position is, and I take this from Reza, rationalist inhumanism. The aim is it is a critique of humanism. It's just a critique which tries to retain some features of it. Well, and the issue is to characterize those features in terms which are amenable to the analysis of evolutionary biology, without thereby collapsing all distinctions between human and animal, and human and machine, and human and non-human, into mere differences of degree rather than difference in kind. So the difficulty is how do we present an account of the difference in kind between animal cognition and rational cognition that nevertheless is amenable to the sorts of continuous descriptions of differences in degree presented by evolutionary biology.
Then my gender has not exactly got a fair deal out of evolutionary psychology. If you remember masterpieces like The Natural History of Rape and The Bell Curve, which naturalize inequalities. The problem with any naturalization process is the question of inequalities. And I'm a little bit stunned that this doesn't figure in the plateau of emergency that sustains your admirable, erudite, and robust, admirable exercise. It's as if the issues of inequalities never resonated. Now, why is that? Is it because your gaze is fixed on the fathers? Are we in an Oedipal struggle that only makes you see the anxiety of influence and no other problems matter? The naturalization of any predispositions has to deal with the issue of genocide, exclusions, and disqualification. And if not, we don't have a conversation.
Well, it's fine. I mean, the questions of the various different axes of oppression which are associated with the philosophical and cultural ideas of humanism and their appropriation in the modern domain. These are important issues, but there is often, and I think this is a theoretical cliché, which I find problematic, and it tends to come out of deconstruction as much as anything else. But to simply assume that there's a natural transition from binaries such as body and mind, nature and culture, to illicit normative privileging of male over female, European over non-European. These things are related, but they're not simply related because they are binaries. So the strategy of simply saying, well, what we have to do is dissolve all binary distinctions in order to get rid of these notions of oppression is flawed. The issue of oppression is more complex. And particularly what I would say is can't be understood independently of an understanding of the concept of freedom. And the concept of freedom requires, I'd say, the sorts of transcendental analyses that I'm attempting to provide.
I think we have to agree to differ. We have the school of radical immanence and the school of neo-transcendentalism also positioning things differently. Where we do agree is on the deconstruction of binaries. Where we disagree is on how the material resonates with the discursive and how the monuments and the documents function together, as Foucault teaches us, that there is a resonance between real-life oppression and systems of exclusions of thought, i.e. there is no transcendence from the messiness of history. I think that's a very big dividing line between the neo-rationalists that the object ontologists are and the front of immanence that remains profoundly in love with reality, however messy it may be.
Well, I'm all for the messiness of reality. And if I can... Oh, sorry. Do we need to... Okay.
I would like to open up. Also, if you want to participate also in the discussion, so just feel free to... It was a little bit erupted, but we have only a few minutes left before we go to the performance, so at least I would like to give you some minutes.
I have a stylistic question.
Yeah.
I was... Sorry. A more sort of flirtatious question, more stylistic. I was very intrigued by your use of language, very precise, very incisive, and quite admirable. And there was a word that kept popping up, and as somebody who's very much sensitive to language because I speak many and none, I was very struck by it. And that word is parochial. Tell me about it.
It's an odd word, but I've not yet found a better one. It's an attempt to... It's playing the role of the particular in relation to the universal. But
another binary. It conceals another binary.
No, it doesn't conceal a binary. It is a binary. It's an obvious, explicit, explanatory binary, okay. Right? And the importance of it is to try and convey the difference between information processing systems that have been evolved or designed in order to deal with information related to very specific practical problems related to perhaps the environments within which they've evolved. So the parochiality has a kind of implication not just of particularity but locality, and information processing systems that can process, in principle, any kind of information. And this could be seen as moving from a certain locality to a kind of globality.
So parochial would be the environment, gender, race, parochial?
No, these are, I mean, they are to some extent parochial insofar as, like, Homo sapiens is parochial. We're on one planet in the universe, and we've evolved in a particular environment, this, that, and the other. But rather, it was about describing the difference between the ability of an ant colony to optimize its search for food by leaving like hormone trails, and the ability of a fully grown, learned human being to solve crossword puzzles and work out ways of solving a whole range of problems for which they haven't necessarily evolved.
Thank you.
So, are there any questions or comments you would like? Yeah, sure. What do you want?
Sorry, did you need this?
No, I don't need anything.
I just wanted to kind of ask Pete about two things that maybe additional layers to your discussion. One is, obviously, we're talking quite a lot about language in that discussion, and I wondered, given the context in which we're operating today, whether you'd like to talk about visual forms of communication and the way that relates to the ideas that are running through your paper. And the other thing would be, obviously, you have, for one reason or another, become loosely associated, probably through speculative realism and social circles, with left accelerationism.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how you can leverage what you're talking about here today in terms of whether or not they connect up to any political opportunities. What can be done with the kind of critical toolkit that you're trying to provide us with?
Okay. Wow. Big questions. First of all, visual forms of communication. I mean, the crucial thing I've got to say about language is that when I say language can potentially encode any kind of information, this doesn't mean that it's actually very information heavy. Like visual forms of communication can communicate a hell of a lot more information in a more kind of condensed space than language can for the most part. The difference is that they tend to be limited to particular kinds of information that they can they can communicate. There's an interesting question about the difference between what you might want to call biosemiotics, so the study of visual signaling and communication between pre-linguistic animals, and the visual semiotics of visual communication between beings that also have language or something analogous to language, right? Because there's a certain sense in which, and I mean, this is what you get I think of Kant's analysis of symbolism. Like in visual images, we are capable of evoking concepts.
May I?
Yeah.
I ask kindly because it's very quick, and
Sorry.
I'm not as English-French translator. In a way, it's German-French. I'm doing better. I understand English, but perhaps you can conclude in 1 or 2 sentences for Monsieur. Or the matter, just no. You're speaking. Vous parlez français. Voilà.
De l'influence anglo-saxonne du travail de Quentin Meillassoux, qui a eu énormément de succès dans les pays anglophones, et tout le monde se jette sur les réalismes spéculatifs, dont Peter est un exponent assez connu. Et donc la discussion tourne autour de ce tournant réaliste spéculatif Meillassoux, qui n'a aucun effet en France, je sais pertinemment, mais voilà la discussion et comment l'impact que ça a eu dans le monde de l'art, qui a été énorme, je ne sais pas pourquoi, parce que moi je ne suis pas de ces côtés-là, mais voilà, ça c'est un petit peu ce qui se joue là maintenant.
Merci.
Can I? Okay. So on the one hand, I think there's a really interesting opportunity to study how it is that our ability to convey conceptual information changes our ability to convey information visually. Like how it is that we can convey conceptual, like the Kant's example is, conveying the idea of innocence in the whiteness of the lily, which is ridiculous. But there's a certain sense in which the bees dance, right, can't do things that ballet can. And this is to some extent because our ability to process information has been bootstrapped by language, even though there's no language involved in the ballet. The second point about accelerationism, I'm a card-carrying left accelerationist, as badly understood as that term is, unfortunately. So I think what the sorts of analyses I've been providing can provide is an alternative conception, or they can help provide an alternative conception of the deterritorializing force that Deleuze and Guattari valorize in capitalism and schizophrenia. And this is where the whole discourse of accelerationism emerges from. And what I can say is, although, for instance, it might not come across, but I'm a huge fan of Deleuze, and I'm a huge fan of Deleuze's metaphysics. I subscribe to most of it. What I don't subscribe to is the way in which his vitalism is used to draw certain normative consequences. I think the idea of using the sort of self-organization of matter as a way of deriving political consequences is just a cheat. I think it causes lots of problems, and so any sort of attempt to pull out these accelerationist ideas of Deleuze and Guattari has to pull them away from some kind of vitalist metaphysics. And one way to do that is to try and provide this sort of account of inhuman agency, or, you know, Reza's account of the sort of self-improvement of intelligence, and to see whether or not that can fly.
That's another very major front of discussion right now. Various brands of accelerationism declaring the radical politics of immanence, the compositions of communities, and the vital materialism bankrupted even before we even try to do anything about it. The discussions go back to postmodernism, to Baudrillard's critique of Foucault and Deleuze. It begins that early. And they all question whether we need a politics that would reintroduce negativity, opposition, and violence, or whether we can stay with ontological pacifism, which is happy to describe the political as the ethical recomposition of a missing people right here, right now, in our daily practice, and from there actually get on to the political. Why it is not enough to have a radically immanent politics, why do we have to bring back a mega discourse of the negative is really a huge discussion, and it's a very important one that is splitting the left at the moment, and that we're not likely to resolve this afternoon, but it's very important to signal it as a very important one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm obviously on the opposite side. Precisely, I mean, you use the word violence to describe transcendence, but, like, look at Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power, right? Which is separated by a thin line from Spinoza's metaphysics of immanence. These are both immanent metaphysics, but Nietzsche's metaphysics is pure violence. Absolutely
what
pure.
Nietzsche is talking about is not pure violence, he's talking about cruelty, a very different concept. We need to introduce here the mediation of Georges Bataille in the accursed share, where you have the complication of radical immanence, which is profound intimacy with the world, profound love of the world, and yet opposition to the horrors and the misery of the world. That internal tension, which is, I think, where precisely the discourse of Spinoza's ethics, reread with the 21st century, of course, has something to say, but not immediately precipitate into back to the oppositional dialectics, which is what you guys are doing for reasons that I don't comprehend, obviously.
I mean, I think the word dialectics is way overcoded, and so I'd stay away from it. But I'm happy to admit that, you know, I'd support, for instance, an opposition between nature and culture that I know you and Donna Haraway and someone like Bruno Latour would reject. But I think that these oppositions are okay, or they can be okay precisely because they can play explanatory roles and they can help us organize our thinking about political issues. In some cases, they are necessary to organize thinking about political issues if you want to avoid falling back into some conception of the natural order. And I think this is the danger of sort of neo-Spinozistic politics, is that, like, the valorization of joy.
There's more Badiou than Deleuze in this, but my question would remain, who is the we? With the politics of radical immanence, we start by saying, who is the we? And the composition of the we makes the political possible through an ethical understanding. Who is the plane of composition of this particularly affective plateau that would make radical immanence possible? You guys have a floating we that is completely another God trick, and I will not buy it.
I also feel like I should, just before we end, I promise, I also feel that that I should just add that left accelerationism and neo-rationalism and speculative realism are often seen to overlap, but don't necessarily. So I think, you know, work that's coming out under the left accelerationist brackets, such as Cernick and Williams' Inventing the Future.
Benjamin Noyes.
Yeah, well, Ben, obviously very critical of accelerationism in that kind of form, but that work is extremely embedded in context. There's a lot of material about surplus populations. There's a lot of material about gendered populations, and it's really trying to step away from this idea of you know, sort of transcending all of that. It's quite immersed in that. The political edge of left accelerationism is very immersed in real bodies and the experiences of real bodies, or it's trying to be, because I think it's responding to a lot of critiques that have come from feminist circles, from post-colonial circles, and there has been a concerted effort within that sphere of discourse to try and engage with that. So whilst I think, you know, there are a lot of really important points that are being raised up, I'm just wary of tarring left accelerationism with, like, the brush that really belongs to...
Yeah.
potentially an accelerofeminist, partially, a xenofeminist, mainly.
And we need to stop on this crucial question because Transformella is waiting for us on the second floor. So thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you.